Melissa Winchell, but here in West Bridgewater, I'm better known as Mariah's mom. I chair Inclusion Matters, the organization hosting the presentation tonight. Inclusion Matters is West Bridgewater's CPAC, a group of parents whose kids have learning differences, special needs, and disabilities. The mission of Inclusion Matters is to widen circles of inclusion so that every child and teen in our school district participates as fully as they can in our schools and in our community. We envision a West Bridgewater that has the expertise not just to love every kid, but to remove social, educational, and community obstacles to every child's growth and flourishing. You can find out more about our organization at the table outside of the auditorium. Please take a pamphlet and join our online community or attend our next event or fundraiser. We are here tonight to learn how to better grow our kids' emotional health. Students are under more pressure than ever before. Much has been said and written about the pressures of school, of standardized testing, of increasingly fraught social decisions as our children turn to teens. And we know that kids are experiencing increasing levels of stress and mental illness, including anxiety and depression. We all know someone, maybe even a child in our own family, who is suffering. As a mom to an elementary student and to 2 high school graduates, I can tell you that these issues have affected our family too. And so you and I are here tonight because we need hope. Hope that we can better support our kids as they learn to navigate their own emotional and mental terrains. As parents, we want to help our kids and help ourselves to cope and even to thrive. And that's why I'm truly excited to welcome Dr. Nija Riley to our stage tonight. Dr. Nija Riley is a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of clinical experience specializing in children, adolescents, and families. Dr. Riley received her master's and PhD degrees in clinical psychology from the University of Miami, Florida, and completed her clinical internship and postdoctoral fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital. She is a founding owner of the Family and Educational Wellness Center practice and is Associate Director of the Friedman Center for Child and Family Development at William James College. Dr. Riley's areas of expertise include the treatment of anxiety, depression, pediatric psychology, and supporting new parents. She works in schools and the community, focusing on prevention, school consultation, curriculum and program development, and education. Dr. Riley is the author of the book, Anxiety and Depression in the Classroom, a teacher's guide for fostering self-regulation in young students. She is also the editor of Preventing Depression, a toolkit for schools, co-editor of the How Not to Keep a Secret Peer Leadership Curriculum, editor and primary author of the Break Free from Depression school curriculum, and executive producer of Break Free from Depression, a documentary focusing on adolescent depression. Dr. Riley has presented at numerous local and national conferences and continues to promote awareness of child and family mental health needs through her teaching, research, and practice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nija Riley.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let me just get my slides up here. Good evening to everybody. I'm a little short. Can you see me over this? Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know how very difficult it is to get out on a weekday when you have kids at home and all of the things to do. So I very much appreciate your time. What I'm hoping is that we can have a conversation today around how to foster emotional strength in kids and adolescents. And some of these, well, all of these things are relevant to children across that age range. But if you have a specific question about a child, either in elementary school versus middle school or high school, please do let me know. I'm happy to clarify anything for you. And the reason why I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk with you and to other parents is because we're really at a stage when we're talking about children's mental health where we're not doing the best we can in terms of early recognition and in terms of access to treatment. So if you take a look at this data, really only about 30% of the kids who actually have a diagnosis and need proper mental health treatment are getting the kind of help that they need. So what this means is that we really need to step away from a model where a child is already in crisis before getting help, and we really need to get to a point where we form a broader network of support that includes the family, that includes the home, that includes the school, so that way our goal can be towards earlier recognition. And if we have earlier recognition, if there are more things that we can put in place, the research tells us actually that there's a 50% higher likelihood of responding well to treatment and of having a particular emotional distress be more temporary rather than something that's more chronic. So I wanted to start with anxiety. There are a lot of things that we could talk about, but how many of you have heard, oh, I'm feeling so stressed or I'm feeling so anxious from your kids? Yeah. So that seems to be really one of the most prevalent complaints that I've been hearing from kids. And one thing that I just want to point out is that actually the word stress and the word anxiety have become almost toxic, and kids are feeling like, oh, if you have any of this, it's bad. Actually, having a little bit of stress and feeling a little bit of anxiety is not a bad thing, because it's the way that your system, your body's letting you know that you have to get ready for some sort of performance. It's really when the worries associated with anxiety become so strong that they get in the way of functioning that it becomes more of a clinical situation. And what's important to note is that anxiety is actually part of a normal system in our brains, that fight or flight response. So when kids tell you that they're feeling anxious, they really do feel it everywhere in their bodies. They feel it physically, they feel it in their thoughts, and they feel it in the way that they're feeling about a particular situation. Now, how many times have you heard a lot of what if? But wait, what if you don't come to pick me up on time? And what if you forget your phone? Or what if you run out of gas? Or what if you have to do something else, right? Those what if questions. So we know that the way that our brain fills in those questions are by trying to get a situation to be clearer. So whenever there's anxiety in the context of a situation that doesn't feel clear, kids will ask, what if, what if, what if? And that is an attempt to really understand or have more predictability. So these are some of the signals to look for, right, when we start noticing that anxiety might be getting in the way. Now, a few what if questions are all right. Let's say that you're going to a new place on vacation and they want to ask you a few questions. That's okay. But it's really when these what if questions become much more frequent, and when they're related to things that are not really tied to situations that are likely to happen, that you know it's more of a concern. So for example, kids who struggle with generalized anxiety disorder, they have a lot of what if questions about many things. What if somebody breaks into the house? What if there's a storm? What if there's a hurricane up here? Now, given how the weather has been recently, those might not be too unrealistic questions, but it's really more along the lines of questions that have to do with either long-term worries or things that don't have anything to do with the relevant moment. Oh, thank you. And again, because this is part of the body's alarm system, you're going to hear it in, I have a stomach ache. I have a headache. I don't feel so good. Can I stay home from school? Or I think I'm getting sick. Now, the important thing here is that they actually are feeling those things. They're not made-up symptoms. They have a much lower threshold when it comes to the sensitivity of noticing these bodily symptoms, so they're not made up. The balance for us as parents is always, how much do you kind of give in to the symptoms and reinforce that, or say, I get it, you're not feeling so great, but let's figure this out for a moment. Is this a nervous tummy ache or is this a real tummy ache, right? You want to give a language to where it's coming from, and then say, I know you have a tummy ache and I know you don't feel great, but you can do this. So one of the things that hopefully we can think about together is, how do you really walk that very fine line of not falling into the avoidance that anxiety often brings, or giving in too much to the symptoms, but really empowering the child to understand what's going on and then do something about it, him or herself. And really that's the major theme, I would say, of what I want to share with you today, is that sometimes when kids really feel a lot of anxiety, they can often feel so overwhelmed and kind of crippled by it that they feel they have no power over it. But one of the most important interventions that we can do, and one of the most important tools that we can give them, is learning how to recognize what's going on, how to verbalize them, and then empower them to actually take action on their own. And that formula, by the way, works for anxiety, depression, other emotional distress that the child might be going through. Now, in terms of what it looks like as a clinical disorder, anxiety is actually one of the most prevalent mental illnesses among children. And the rates can change between 7 to 28%. And the reason why you see such a big discrepancy is because the anxiety disorders actually encompass a large range of different diagnoses. So you might see a lower incidence of things like PTSD, but a much higher incidence of things like either school refusal or generalized anxiety or separation anxiety. Now, the average onset of an anxiety disorder is age 11, although we're definitely seeing kids who are really starting to struggle with some symptoms way earlier. I've been getting a lot of kids who are actually starting to show some symptoms of anxiety as little as preschool. So one of the important things about anxiety is that the earlier we treat it, the better. The earlier we address it, the better. Because the longer that a child goes with an untreated anxiety disorder, the higher the likelihood that he or she will develop a secondary anxiety disorder. For adolescents, we know that it also significantly increases the risk for depression and or substance use. Okay. So how do these symptoms resonate with you? Do they seem familiar? So I have two sons, two boys, and the younger one definitely struggles with a lot of anxiety. And these things just became kind of a part of a normal routine. I don't feel good, I have a stomach ache, I can't go to school, I can't do this. And a lot of these symptoms actually become kind of the excuse or the reason for avoiding things that are frightening to begin with, right? So things like crying, for a lot of elementary school kids, crying is something is scary. I'm anticipating that something will be scary. I don't want to go. Now, it doesn't mean that something will be scary. It means that their perception of what could happen, remember all of those worries and those what-if questions, provoke fear and worry. And in turn, crying or saying, please don't make me go to school, please don't make me go to school, is actually the way to avoid that anticipated fear. A lot of GI distress. So I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you feel really, really nervous. You know how your stomach just kind of gets tied up in a knot? Our gut is actually quite sensitive to anxiety. So these GI symptoms that kids experience are actually quite real. Irritability. So in younger kids, elementary school, but definitely even into middle school and high school, sometimes sadness or emotional distress, instead of coming out necessarily as tears or what we might see as more withdrawn, actually comes out as irritability. So kind of snapping back at people or being pretty cranky. having a hard time transitioning or being flexible. So a lot of times, people and families describe feeling like they're either walking on eggshells because they don't quite know how the child is going to respond to something new, or feeling like your plans just get completely changed because somebody digs their heels in. And a lot of times it becomes quite a battle of the wills. And it's not because the child is intending to do that. A lot of times the anxiety can come across as being argumentative, or it can come across as being inflexible. And unfortunately, what that leads to then is a whole family discord, because then siblings get into it. Why can't you just, be flexible? Let's just go. It's so easy. You've been there before. And I see some of you reacting. It sounds like that's familiar to what you've seen. So one of the things I would say is, if you have a child who presents that way, where they kind of dig their heels in, it's really not worth kind of getting into that battle, because the more either judged they feel, or the more kind of ganged up on that they feel, the more that it's going to feel like the need to dig in their heels. So to relieve some of that anxiety, sometimes what's better is kind of giving a moment, everybody taking a breather, and then coming back with perhaps two different choices. Say, okay, so here's what we have to do. We can do it this way, or we can do it this way. Which one would feel better for you? So if you're seeing what feels like more behavioral acting out, often that can also be driven by anxiety. One of the things that you also might have noticed is, if you ever got into one of those kind of escalating situations where inevitably many people end up angry, often kids whose behavior is driven by anxiety will come back to you and say, I'm sorry, or might feel really embarrassed about what happened, or might feel like, I did this, right? So there's a high level, a sense of shame and embarrassment that goes along with that. And that's why in schools, when I work with teachers, and they say, I can't believe, we've been working on this for so hard, and he just took that piece of paper and crumbled it up and threw it out and said, I'm not doing this piece of homework, or I'm not doing this work, or I don't know if it's ever happened to you at home. But the opportunity to have repair and to have another chance of trying it in a different way is really important. And the reason for that is because it targets the sense of shame that they have. It relieves that and says, it's okay, I get that was a really bad moment, and I trust that you can have a better moment. The other piece that kids who struggle with anxiety as well as depression is they have a really hard time with emotional regulation. So sometimes feeling good and the feelings of happiness are hard to kind of keep up, and the feelings of having a really hard day or something being really bad are really high, and it's difficult to bring those down, essentially to kind of keep a balance between what's going well and what's not going so well. So when we talk about emotional regulation skills, we have to talk about really identifying what's going on at the moment and saying, okay, let's take a look at the evidence. What makes this so bad? Or what's making this go well? And what can you do to change it if you want to make it different? A lot of times you'll hear kids saying, oh, it was my teacher's fault, or it was your fault, or, it should have been done differently, I just had really bad luck. And they attribute a lot of their circumstances and their outcomes to outside sources. And part of what we want to make sure we do is not so much make them say, oh, it was all my fault, but say, what can you do in this situation? What one action can you take to make things be different? Bringing that level of control back into the child is always one of the goals of what we want to do. Does that make sense so far? Yeah? Any questions about that? Okay. So another reason why really taking a look at this is so important is because it not only, these symptoms, And of course, the worries associated with anxiety have an impact not only socially and with the family, but also in the context of the classroom. One of the biggest pieces that I have noticed in terms of working with kids who struggle with anxiety, and I wonder whether you have seen this at home when trying to do homework, is difficulties with what's called processing efficiency. What this looks like in functionality is that you're sitting with your child and he's doing his homework, and you're going through all of the math problems, and you're like, you got this, that's exactly right, this is great. The minute you step away, it's all forgotten, right? Wait, I don't get it. I forgot, I don't remember. Part of what happens is kids who struggle with anxiety, it's almost like they need an external coach to keep all of those what-if thoughts away from the process of what they're doing. So you are serving as that external coach. The minute you step away, then all of those what-if questions come back and actually get in the way of being able to initiate and sustain the work that they're doing. So some tricks for that, you might want to think about, okay, so let's say you have a math sheet, and you know those time things that they have to do? And there's like a million problems, and they have to do it in a minute. That one is always a problem. You could say, how about you just do the odd numbers? Or how about you just do the even numbers? Or how about you go up and down instead of across? Sometimes those little tricks actually can help make it feel more manageable. So instead of looking at a blank page and thinking, I only have a minute to get this done, you're actually looking at fewer ones. So this is one of the accommodations that are actually really helpful in the classroom. And what I would encourage you to do is talk to your child's teacher. If he or she is making accommodations like that, see how you could transfer that into the work that you're doing with them at home and helping them with homework. What do you think? Is it possible to have too much challenge in one day? Right? You know, I am amazed at how much kids are reporting that they feel so stressed all the time. Sometimes even in a way that feels kind of paralyzing for them. Like, I'm just too stressed, so it means I cannot do anything. So I wanted to propose a model to you, which is about what we can do. So instead of kind of getting caught up in that sense of urgency related to the stress, how could we step back for a moment, do a little bit of reflection, and help the kids bring down the intensity of that feeling that they have at the moment and share with them some skills that they can use? So proposing 3 things, right? To notice, to give, and to nurture. And noticing would be the self-reflection that you would go through in terms of thinking about, what am I contributing to this particular interaction at the moment? What could I do differently? What might I need to understand about my child a little bit more in order to be able to help him or her? Give has to do with the skills and the support and the responses that you want to use with the kids at the moment when they're sort of having the hardest time. And nurture, maintaining the relational and emotional safety that kids need to promote emotional growth. And I want to emphasize that these things actually are incredibly helpful, not just with kids who are struggling with anxiety, but really for all kids as we're thinking about promoting their social and emotional health. So what can I notice? What can you as a parent notice? How confident do you feel about engaging your child around his or her mental health needs? Now, when we think about, just in general, how many people struggle with a mental illness, it's 1 out of 5 people globally. So what that means is that very likely you will have had an experience of mental health needs, either for yourself or someone close to you. And sometimes when we're struggling with our kids, we struggle with thinking, what's this bringing up for me, or what's going on? And so sometimes our own fear or our own anxiety, our own worries about the future can further fuel a situation at the moment. And sometimes kind of stepping back for a moment and reflecting on that can be really helpful to bring yourself back to the moment, right? Because as a parent, I know I go to those what if questions in a second, right? I start thinking about, well, what's next year going to be like? And then what's going to happen? And what if this doesn't go well? So asking ourselves to do what we're asking the kids to do is really important. How am I attempting to comfort my child? Is it process-based or outcome-based? And by that I mean sometimes we really focus on the outcome. So how'd you do in your vocab quiz today? Yeah, did you get an A? Well, what do you mean? What happened? You didn't get an A? Oh, okay. So, right, we go right to the outcome. Or sometimes what we give the most attention to is a positive outcome. Actually, for kids who struggle with anxiety or who struggle with any other kind of emotional distress, the process is more important. So remember we talked about those difficulties with efficiency, and we talked about those difficulties with kind of starting homework. Those are the things that need to be rewarded. And actually, initiation, self-initiation from kids, those are the things that need to be rewarded, and the outcome can come a little bit later. When we really focus on saying, you know what, I noticed that you were sitting down for like 30 minutes, and I know you didn't want to do that homework, but you stuck with it and you did it. I'm really so proud of you. That actually helps to promote internal sense of control and motivation rather than the outcome. Because the outcome can be somebody else's fault, right? Or it can be the teacher gave me a bad quiz, or, I just didn't understand it that day. But the process helps to promote internal motivation. And how do I understand my child's behaviors? What assumptions might I be making about his or her ability to manage what's going on? Especially in those moments when you're having, a heated argument, or you're trying to get out the door and you're already like 15 minutes late and you're going to miss your other kid's game because this one doesn't want to budge. Especially in those moments, it's really hard not to say, okay, you got to just stop it. You have to snap out of this, or you're doing this. This feels very manipulative, right? Making those assumptions might lead us to taking a course of action that might be counterproductive at that moment. So again, stepping back for a little bit, kind of regrouping and coming back to the child can be really helpful at that moment. The other thing is understanding what styles match your own. Now, for some people, when there's a new situation coming up or you're problem solving, some people love to have all the information at hand, right? Like, okay, so what do I need to do? Where is this? Where am I going? Where am I going to park? Like, all of that information you need to have. For some people, they're like, you know what? Just take me along for the ride. When I get there, then I'll worry about it. If you have one style and your child has the other style, and you're each trying to relieve your anxiety by doing more of opposite styles, it can feel like you're just not understanding each other, right? So having a sense of how that works, maybe recruiting somebody that has your child's same style can be helpful. Or maybe just stepping back and saying, what would be helpful to you at this moment? What can I do? What would be helpful in answering your questions? Okay, so questions you can ask yourself: what am I ultimately trying to achieve with my child in this situation, right? What am I hoping is going to happen right now? Is what I'm hoping to achieve realistic, right? Am I really hoping that all of the homework is going to get done by 6 o'clock? Like, is that going to be realistic, or are we going to have to flex a little bit? Are we going to have to think a little bit more creatively? And does my child understand my goals and trust that you have his or her best? Oh, that shouldn't be my child. That should be your child. It should be more of an open communication process and say, here's what I'm hoping we can do right now. Tell me how you think we can get there. Sometimes inviting problem solving from a child before telling him or her what to do, again, can increase that sense that, hey, I have some sense of being able to do things here, or I have some tools at my disposal. So involving the child in kind of thinking about what the outcome will be can be very helpful. Okay, and the other thing is, you do a lot for your kids, and so I also want you to be able to have some compassion for yourselves and some wiggle room to have realistic expectations. It's really important to have goals and to work really hard to help your child, but this also takes a little bit of time, and it also has to involve your child's growth. So in that, parents can be pretty hard on themselves, kind of beating themselves up. I should have done this last month, or I should have known that, 3 years ago, or I should have done this. Whenever you start hearing yourself with a lot of should haves, please note that that's not a really helpful thing, right? It's more at the moment thinking, okay, where am I right now and what can I do? Does that make sense so far? Yeah, are there any particular questions about what we just discussed? Okay. All right, so sharing some of the things that you can give. So one of the things that we know for sure is that kids who struggle with emotional distress do not typically have a wide range of emotional vocabulary. They have a harder time saying things like, I feel overwhelmed, or they have a hard time saying things like, I feel really frustrated. When you do not have a word for what you're experiencing, it's so much easier for emotions to kind of take over instead of this front part of your brain, right? The emotions, the experience of it will speak more loudly if you don't have a word for what you're experiencing. So a really important piece that we can share with kids is modeling and sharing emotional vocabulary. You can talk about how you're feeling. You can offer them different choices. Like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated. Is that right? Let's talk about what frustrated is. The more that you can practice that, even during good times too, use positive emotion words, the more range in that vocabulary, the better they can manage those big emotions because they have a word for it. Full attention. So how many of you have been called out when you're answering a question while responding to an email or doing something else? Mike, have you? My kids will actually say to me, okay, repeat what I just said to you. What? I was paying attention. I heard half of it, right? So one of the things that's really important and just easy to do is to put down whatever is going on at that moment and just turn your attention straight to what the child is saying. You would be surprised, actually, that little intervention, how far it goes, because when the child feels like you're giving the undivided attention, then everything feels more contained. Healthy communication, and we'll talk about some skills around that. Predictable interactions. So if a child gets in trouble for not budging and not doing something one time, then that should be consistent across the board. And it's not just around, there should be consequences for this all the time, but it's more around creating a predictable emotional environment for kids who already struggle with anxiety. Because at some point, if they don't know what they're doing is correct or incorrect, or what will come, what kind of emotional response will come back, that actually makes them more anxious. So predictable interactions and space for independent problem solving. I am the first one to admit that if one of my sons is struggling with something, I'm like, all right, I'm on it. What am I going to do, right? I'm going to do this, 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 and that. And that's okay, but not really sometimes, because you want them to have, one, to figure out what the problem is. 2, you want them to tolerate a little bit of distress that it feels like to be in that situation. And 3, problem solve around what to do. So, for example, I got a really bad grade on this test and this isn't fair. Can you talk to the teacher? Well, one possibility might be for you to email or call the teacher, right? Another possibility might be, okay, so let's talk about why do you think this grade came out this way? Let's talk about that. I could talk to your teacher, but I think it would be better if you talk to your teacher. What might you say? I can't talk to her, that's too scary, or she's going to get mad at me. Okay, so let's practice it. If she gets mad at you, what could you say? And you do a little bit of role playing. And then you say, okay, so you could talk to her, what else could you do? And you invite problem solving. Actually, it might feel like terrifying for them at the moment, but learning how to tolerate distress is actually one of the biggest skills that they can have for promoting emotional health and wellness. Especially for kids who struggle with anxiety, because remember, they're going to want to avoid anything that feels scary. So if you can help them tolerate what feels scary and actually work through it, it can be very helpful. But let's be realistic, right? Because it's not like you always get a perfectly calm, rational child in front of you. Many times you get someone who's pretty agitated or might be like, no, you just don't understand. You don't get it. So at the immediate moment when you're anticipating a difficult situation, you want to try to just remain calm and avoid things like, everything's going to be fine, just don't worry about it. When you've been really mad and you've been telling somebody about it and they're like, oh, you're just overreacting. What's that like for you? You're like, oh, I'll show you overreacting now, right? So kind of the same thing. They don't want to hear, oh, everything's going to be fine. Calm and neutral is very helpful. Distraction is also very helpful. So you know what? Why don't you come and walk and talk with me? I need to go outside and walk the dog. Come with me, and we can talk while we're walking the dog. Active listening and validation rather than trying to convince. But really, why did you do that? I mean, I don't get it. Why don't you just do this? That's actually trying to convince. Active validation is more like, okay, so I hear you telling me that this didn't go well because. Did I get that right? That is not jumping to problem solving. That is just checking in. Did I get that right from you? And understanding sometimes when to write out the emotional release. Sometimes they just need to kind of get it out. I don't recommend throwing things or punching pillows or like screaming and yelling to release that, because sometimes I think that actually feels more dysregulating for kids. Instead, things like a nice warm bath or a containing corner. Sometimes just feeling like I'm going to go snuggle in bed with my favorite blanket or going into a quiet space. But anything that's more rageful actually dysregulates them more. The other thing that's extremely helpful is teaching them how to relax. Now, I'm not recommending saying, oh, just relax, because again, that'll get you not so good looks and responses back. But it's really thinking about, you know what? I'm noticing that you're so upset right now that your whole body's telling you, right? I can see it in your clenched fists, or I can see it in your eyebrows, or I can see that your shoulders are way up here. Why don't we try doing something called progressive muscle relaxation, right? And what you do is two things. One, you can do it at the moment when you're feeling really tense and agitated to get your body to calm down. Or if you're really anticipating a situation that feels scary and you're already getting all worked up because you're thinking about it, you can start doing that progressive muscle relaxation to help your body relax. We do this, and it's a really important part of treatment because kids who struggle with anxiety are very, very hyper-tuned to what's going on in their bodies. So anything feels like something's going to be wrong. Like a small stomach ache might feel like, oh my goodness, I'm going to throw up or something bad's going to happen. Or I just feel like I'm not, like I'm sick, I'm not feeling well. So we need to get their bodies to relax. We need that alarm system to go down. And that way their thoughts will also then calm down. Breathing is another technique that is incredibly important. Now, try this. I had to go teach 9th graders on a Friday afternoon about depression. And I was trying to tell them to breathe. And they said, thank you very much. We already know how to breathe. So you have to catch them in a moment where they might be more receptive. But there are a couple of different things that you could do. It's not just about, okay, take a deep breath. But you can actually trick them in a couple of ways. I'll tell you how. If you feel like going along with this, I invite you to put a hand on your chest and a hand on your stomach. And just take some nice normal breaths as you would. Just take a nice deep breath. And one more. Okay, whose hand on your chest was moving more than on your stomach? Okay. Whose hand on the stomach was moving more? Guess what? Doesn't matter. But I got you to focus on your breath. Right? For a moment, you were really like, all right, I'm focusing on this and I'm looking at what I'm doing. So that's one way that you can engage them in a breathing exercise. Another one is the 4-4-4-4 technique. So you breathe in for 4, out for 4, in for 4, out for 4. If you have elementary school kids, little ones, you can tell them to pretend that they have a pinwheel in one hand and they have a cookie on the other. And they can make up those things to be whatever they want, right? It can be any kind of cookie. It can be as big as they want. The pinwheel can be as colorful and wonderful as they want. And what you want them to do is to breathe in that cookie, that smell, and then blow on the pinwheel to make it spin. So you add some components of visualization, and actually that really gets them excited because they're thinking about what kind of cookie it is and the colors on the pinwheel, and they focus more on their breathing. For kids who like visualization, who like imagery, that's another thing that you can do. However, I will tell you that actually, just as we have different learning styles, some kids are auditory learners, some kids are visual learners, there are different styles of imagination. So some kids might be able to visualize something, but other kids might have a hard time doing that. They might be able to hear something or smell something in imagination first. So if you're trying to do this exercise with your child, find out which sense comes to them first when they imagine something and start from there. If you start from, let's visualize, a really cool place, and they can't see it right away, they'll conclude that this doesn't work. Okay, so I also wanted to, in the vein of kind of noticing what you're doing and what you're giving, again, as parents, our primary purpose is just so that our kids are feeling better, right? It's really hard to see them in distress. And sometimes when that happens, we tend to want to give some very positive reassurance that everything's going to be okay. But at that moment, kids need a little bit more than just that. So we want to think about how do we reassure with a purpose. So the kind of reassurance that you want to stay away from is, that could never happen, and I'll tell you why. No, we're never going to get a hurricane up here in Massachusetts, and I'll tell you why. I bet you can think your child will say, well, in 19 so-and-so, this happened, and then right after that, we had a series of 3 hurricanes in a row. So they will come back at you with all sorts of counterpoints. Or just stop worrying, that's overreacting. Well, if somebody tells you, don't think about a pink elephant, what are you going to be thinking about? That pink elephant. So saying don't worry actually makes you focus on the worry some more. Or, oh, I really don't want to go to school because I have to give a talk in front of everybody. Oh, don't worry about it. Nobody can tell that you're nervous. Do you think they're buying that? No. So this is, more on the right kinds of reassurance. If this is a real problem that will happen, you will figure out what to do. You're not denying that something, couldn't happen, but what you're also giving in there is the message that you have the power to do something about it. You can manage your worry. Let's focus on that. So instead of focusing on not worrying, say, yeah, okay, you have this worry going on. Fair enough. Let's manage on how we can take care of that. And you can tolerate anxiety or nervous feelings. Even if you look a little nervous, you can handle it. When you hear that, does that make you feel a little bit better? It's okay. Even if you look a little nervous, you can handle it. Again, the key ingredient in this one is bringing that sense, that locus of control back onto the child and saying, you have a tool. There is something that you can do to handle this. You can also invite them to think about what do they act like and feel like and think like when they're feeling stressed. This is, again, an exercise that helps for every child, not just those who might be struggling with any kind of disorder. But kids a lot of times will go from 0 to 60, right? I'm fine to, ooh, I don't feel great, I'm really stressed. And then you start trying to tease that apart, and they have a hard time telling you why. So start with your body. Okay, so where do you feel it the most? Do you feel it in your legs the most, in your back, in your stomach? What people or situations make you feel stressed? How do those people or places affect me? And what have I noticed and learned about myself? I work with high school students who are peer leaders, and they go in and they teach the younger students in middle school and in high school about health and wellness. And they said that this has been one of the most helpful things that they can talk to the other kids about, because everybody at some point feels stress. So right away, there's no stigma associated with saying the word anxiety or saying the word depression. It's about stress. And it's also a good conversation starter in terms of, when I feel stressed, this is how I feel. What have you noticed about me? I bet your kids can tell you all of these, the answers to all of these questions when you ask them what it's like for you. How do you know when mommy's stressed? What kind of people stress mom out? They'll tell you. Now again, coming back to what can I do? You always want to get information, but then follow it up with what do I do with that information, right? So who can I talk to? What kinds of things make me feel more successful? What are my 5 top coping skills? I actually invite high school students to write this down like on a little 3x5 index card and have it in their wallet. Or have it in their planners, have it somewhere accessible, because when you're stressed out in the moment, it's kind of hard to think of something. But if you have it ready to go, it's a wonderful resource to reference back. You can, as a family, think about what are 5 really helpful things that people can do and put it up on your fridge. And when somebody's having a hard time, say, okay, let's look back here and let's see what we can do together as a family to help us feel better. Now, the other piece that I really wanted to bring to your attention is around self-talk. Often when we are with our kids, we see the behavioral stuff. We notice that there's something going on, but we don't always hear their self-talk. And self-talk can be incredibly help us in thinking about, to what extent is this happening all the time? And to what extent is my child kind of defining her, himself, based on more of these distressing thoughts? Self-talk can be a great thing. It can be like, I did a really good job today, and I'm so proud of myself, and I'm going to do that again. Or it can be, I can't believe that I'm the only person in class who doesn't get this. Everybody's going to think I'm stupid, and nobody's going to want to be in this group project with me. based on those two different types of self-talk, the child's emotions will be very different. So thought stopping is something that's really helpful. And you can do this with your child. This is one of the cornerstones of therapy when we do cognitive behavioral therapy. But you can also have the language of thought stopping, which is, okay, let's recognize what our anxious thoughts are. Things like, nobody's going to want to talk to me, or nobody's going to want to help me, or the teacher's going to know that I don't understand this, right? And say, okay, so I know that this is anxiety talking. This is the worry thoughts. I just need to say stop and immediately change the direction of your thoughts. Now, it can be singing a song. Actually, when you sing a song, you use a different part of your brain, so it engages your brain differently and helpfully. It can be movement. It can be talking to someone. This doesn't mean that you're telling the child never acknowledge those thoughts or pretend that they don't exist. It's just that there are moments when they have to function, and they can't sit there kind of processing these thoughts over and over and over again. So thought stopping can be a really helpful intervention. Let's say that, they're in class and they are having a lot of anxious thoughts. They can use thought stopping. Or let's say you have a child who's afraid of crowds, and you're going out to dinner and you have to be there and they're getting really nervous. You could do some thought stopping together. Emotional coaching is also really helpful, particularly for those of you that might have middle school or high school age kids. Using a lot of learner questions. Now, I know this isn't always easy. I have a 16-year-old, and sometimes he tells me he does things, and I'm like, well, you're 16, and I really have to tell you not to stick your foot in the toilet? Like, what? So instead of, going at it like, what's wrong with you? Or what the heck made you do that? It's like, okay, let's figure this out. How did your foot end up in there? Like, what happened? So I know it's not easy, but learner questions actually invite them to kind of process the situation and do some problem solving. Have any of you had the experience where your child comes and tells you the same story like 30 times? You're like, I heard that one already, but they tell you over and over. By the second time, you're already on like plan Z for problem solving. They're still stuck telling you the same thing. That's actually their way of processing the situation and problem solving. Every time they retell the story, they integrate another part of it, and they're not jumping to problem solving like we usually do. So one of the things that you can do by kind of promoting this self-reflection is actually encouraging them to think more about their role in the situation, understanding more about what other people did, why they responded the way they did. And using humor and playfulness can be really important. Sometimes they get so afraid that they've made a mistake or they have to talk to you about something serious that when you throw some humor in there or you're playful, it kind of lowers everybody's defenses, and it actually helps to access information in a different way. Okay, does that make sense so far? Okay. Other things that are incredibly helpful, mindfulness. I'm not talking about the kind of mindfulness where you sit in a corner and you're like, because let's face it, I don't know how many of you could do that. I can't do that. I get too distracted by things that are going on. But mindfulness is more of a sense of just focusing on the thing that you're doing at the moment with your entire self. So if you're watching TV with your child, sit there and watch TV for the entire time instead of trying to do 50 things at the same time. Or if you're walking, do that mindfully. Helping kids learn how to do that is incredibly helpful because that actually breaks that cycle of worry. It breaks some of those what-if questions. If they're really struggling and they're having a hard time because they're so in their head, and you know how it is when kids who struggle with anxiety have a situation going on, they can be in their head a lot. You can invite them to use their senses to kind of come back to be grounded. So you can say, all right, let's look around and let's find 5 blue things. Let's listen for 4 different sounds. Let's find 3 different things that you can touch that have a different texture. Find 2 things that you can smell and 1 thing that you can taste. All of a sudden, the brain is now engaged in a particular task. You're using your senses. It brings you back to the moment. What can I nurture? So all of those things, by doing all of those exercises and practicing those skills, you build emotional safety. Now remember, if kids are struggling, they might be embarrassed to tell you what's going on, or if they feel like if they say something, they might be punished. It doesn't feel necessarily safe to share what they are already perceiving to be kind of crazy thoughts. So when you do all of these things, it really promotes a sense of, okay, well, you know what? Everybody has anxiety to some point. This is what my anxiety looks like. I know what I do, so it's okay for me to come up to you and we can problem solve together. The other thing that it really promotes is a sense of self-efficacy, though. As hard as it is to watch your child struggle, or be sad, or not know how to solve a problem, if you can help them, be with them, and say, I'm here, I am right here with you, but ride that moment of distress, I promise you at the other end, they're going to feel like, okay, we made it through there, you were there for me, I can do it, right? And the message has to be, you can do something about this. We might start out small, but you can do something about this. So that's all I have. I wanted to spend a little bit of time. If you have any questions, I would love to answer any questions you might have or hear any comments you might have about maybe what resonated for you. Yes?
Getting out of the door is very late.
Yes.
So my daughter's in preschool and has some issues with like the feeling of shoes and socks and stuff. And has a little bit of anxiety. So I find myself a lot of times like we sort of I'll get frustrated and she'll get more anxious, and so do you have any recommendations for that moment? And I said that we get set back, but it's something where she's comfortable and we kind of deal with that kind of situation. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. So a couple of things I can think about, and again, this has to be something that fits your child, but any kind of pre-preparation the night before that she's involved in is really helpful. So, you can spend some time feeling the shoes, which one feels most comfortable, and she can put them somewhere, right? Because then she's an active participant in that. You're not picking up shoes for her. The other thing is, it can be so much fun to turn something into a song, into a silly song. So, he would kill me if I say this, so you're all sworn to secrecy. My son, to get him to go to the bathroom at night, we would sing a song, you gotta go pee-pee so you don't pee on me. So that was his song, but it's turning something into a song, like something related to the shoes or something out the door. And preschoolers love songs, and kind of even like a little ritual to go with it, like, okay, so we're going to give a kiss on the cheek, and out the door, and that's part of the song. But again, it engages a different sense, and it makes it more fun. Yes?
High school girls just will not do laundry.
That might take more than a couple of minutes. Well, I'm sure there's a lot more behind the stubbornness, but I'm wondering if there are other things that she will do more consistently, or things that she will help you with. And sometimes it's a little bit of a trade-off, right? So you do this, and I'll take care of the laundry, but you have to do this consistently.
I mean, a lot of kids don't keep their rooms clean, is that true?
Yes. Yes.
So you leave them alone, shut the door.
Well, that's a tough question for me to answer because it depends a lot on what your values are around what they do and what their chores should be and all of that. So I guess what I would say is it's really important to have a very explicit conversation about why you think it's helpful and important. Sometimes they think like, it makes no difference. Why do I have to make the bed? Nobody's going to come into my room and look anyway, right? So it's just sitting down and sharing what your thoughts are around that and what understanding or what compromise might come out of that. Yes?
My son, he's on the spectrum, and we went to take a shot this week, and he's telling me he was more than to go. I don't like to. I need needles. I don't. Well, I don't know if you're getting shots. I'm not sure. No. And of course, and I said, Mom, let's try. And he got so emotional, and I was trying to be cool, and I just lost it. And I was like, trying to be strong for him, but I could see that he just wasn't confident because I was really strong, and so I couldn't hold him. We tried singing, and I just couldn't get him to calm down. It was a good shot of it, but my husband doesn't feel so much too but I know he's going to be having conversations coming out that are more important.
I don't know if his pediatrician's office would allow you to just have a visit where you just take him in so he can see where he's going to sit, so he can understand what's going to happen and ask questions that he might have. I don't know if he's an information gatherer, but you can say, let's find 3 questions that you have for the doctor, and this will help you know what's going to happen. And then I don't know if he has anything that helps soothe him. Like, I don't know if he has a phone or Minecraft. Okay. So to say, okay, so let's figure this out. How can you play Minecraft while you're getting the whatever immunizations, right? And just help him visualize the whole thing and practice it beforehand where it's not such high stakes right at the moment. Yes.
So you spoke earlier about when they have anxiety, getting ready for school, and take a step back before they run out the door and stuff. But what do you do when you have a child? I have 3 children, but 2 of them are terrified. What do you do when a child is very persistent about not getting running on time to get to school? Like, probably late almost every day. I've done the step back, I've done the bribery, I've done I'll put the shoes on for you and let you have a little more time with this and that. But now it's starting to negatively affect his older daughter, being late for school and everything else. So how do you choose when to give in to them and when to be like, okay, enough is enough, and turn it out?
Yeah. So that's a pretty complex question. So I'm going to give you like a couple of hints here and there. But I would, if it's easy enough for you to find someone to talk to, that might be a good thing to do to just kind of get him on a routine in the morning. But one thing is, are you the only one who could do drop-off, or do you have anyone who could help you? Okay. All right. Have you tried choices like, we need to leave at this time, we can do this or this?
4 years.
We've done counseling, we've done bribery, we've done, you can be late for this long. It was first we wouldn't get on the bus, so now I drive him to school. Then it was, I want to pick him up home, so I can pick up 2 times a week. So he's always like changing until he gets everything he wants. And I don't think that's necessarily helpful.
Right. So that's a pretty big question. And so I would definitely encourage you, if you can, again, to think about working with someone who specializes in working with kids, because that sounds a bit like separation anxiety to me. And so, having one consistent approach, even though it might feel really, really hard, is the most important thing. And maybe recruiting the help of school. So in the morning, there's some routine that happens, somebody who helps you on pickup or something like this. But I'm sorry, I can't go into the whole thing, but it just feels like separation anxiety. So I think it would be really helpful to work with somebody who maybe specializes in working with that. Yes?
To the point that she don't even want to go out off the dog because it's dark outside. Mm-hmm. She hides under the stairs just so she won't see the dark outside.
So do you remember some of those things? So the muscle relaxation and identifying those thoughts. So when it's dark, blank will happen. So it's going to be really important to identify what the blank is. And then progressively helping her to tolerate a little more. So you start with, maybe it's a little bit darker outside, but you're still in a place of light, and you look at the dark and you start doing some relaxation, you start doing some breathing until you feel like you could take a next step towards where it's dark. It's what is called a fear hierarchy. And sometimes people just develop pretty strong reactions, like fearful reactions to something in particular. In this case, it sounds like it's of the dark. And the treatment for that is to be able to progressively target it until she's able to tolerate being in a dark room by herself and be just fine. It's again, it can be really helpful if you have someone guiding you through that, because it's important to be able to feel relaxed and tolerate at the minimal levels until you get to the highest goal of being in a totally dark place. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.